So, if y'all remember, a couple of months ago, I talked about how the Supreme Court might be taking up a case that could possibly overturn gay marriage in the United States. Now, this was the case from the Kentucky clerk that sued, saying I was forced to violate my First Amendment rights, my First Amendment religious rights, to issue marriage licenses to gay couples, and I don't believe in that. It's very similar to what happened in Alabama that we all heard about almost immediately following the Obergefell decision back in 2015, where that one clerk refused to hand out any marriage licenses to gay couples in Alabama, and I believe lost her job like 2 or 3 weeks later. I think, they kind of kept saying, hey, do it, please, you're going to lose your job, all this stuff. And then finally, I think they fired her. I don't remember. That I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments, and I can, change that in the future. But this case, this was always kind of a long shot, not necessarily on the chance to get into the Supreme Court, but on the chance to pass. So I've always been of the opinion that the states should be the ones to make these decisions. That if the state of South Carolina wants to say no gay marriage, then the state of South Carolina can do that. But what the problem here is that marriage has been enshrined through Loving v. Virginia as a constitutional right. And that was the case that overturned the no mixed race couples laws throughout the states. So I find it unlikely that unless you overturn Loving, that any sort of overturn of Obergefell will ever happen. The problem that I see here, though, is we've created marriage as a fundamental right, and we've created having children as a fundamental right. But then we see them as two different rights. And I don't think that's the way that it should be looked at. I think having children should be the fundamental right, and marriage should be a tool to get to having children. I still think that the way the court should have handled this back in 2015 is they should have removed, they should have basically separated marriage and the tax stuff that you get for being married. So one of the reasons that Loving and Obergefell passed the way they did was because it was pretty clear that if they didn't let, back in 67, mixed race couples, and then in 15, homosexual couples, if they didn't let them get married, then there was a tax issue with equality under the law there. In 67, the issue you had was basically white couples and black couples were allowed to get married and there was tax implications there, but the same tax protections and implications could be applied to a mixed race couple. Well, we had the same issue that was going on in with gay couples in Obergefell. So I still say that how they should have handled that was they should have basically said, okay, the government's no longer going to recognize marriage. Marriage is not a thing in government. If you want to team up with somebody, have that relationship, have that exclusivity, get those tax benefits, you can do that. You can go get your civil partnership. That's what the government's going to issue. We're going to issue civil partnerships. If you want to have a marriage ceremony and have your church involved, then you can do that. But that's on you. We're not going to enforce that. We're not going to do anything with that. That's what I think the federal government should have done. There should have been a line separate. If you want to preach this whole separation of church and state, then the state shouldn't be able to rule on what is profoundly a religious commitment. And that's what marriage is. It's a religious commitment. So, and I know I'm going to get a bunch of comments that sit there and say, you don't know what you're talking about. Marriage has been a thing outside of religion for, 30,000 years. When in all honesty, let's be honest, no, it hasn't. Religious couples are much more likely to get married. They're much more likely to have kids than non-religious couples. It's just a fact. So this whole forcefulness of non-religious ideals onto religious customs, in my opinion, is one of the things that's kind of created the downfall we've seen in the last decade. But like I said, in that video, I said something along the lines of that I thought this had a good chance of getting to the Supreme Court, and I did. I'm a little surprised that they rejected this case. I think that they rejected it, and I need to read through their denial and stuff like that. But I think they rejected it because it didn't have good legs. That it wasn't something they wanted to use to challenge Obergefell, because we already know 2 or 3 of the justices want to overturn Obergefell, but they need an actual good case. And I don't think a case just based on a single person's freedom of religion to not issue marriage licenses, I don't think that's a good case to do it on. I think the better thing would be to have an actual state bring a lawsuit saying that the Supreme Court never had the right to hear that case. That's what I think is a better issue. And honestly, the best state to do that, in my opinion, is California. But that's not going to happen for a while. It was Prop 8 from California that was overturned in Obergefell. That's what the lawsuit originated on. So I think California is the best state for that to actually happen in. But as we know, California, that's not going to happen for a very long time. Guys, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and comment below what do y'all think. Let's try to be polite at least. I know any of the liberals that are going to comment, any of the crazy redhead, crazy blue-haired idiots, they're not going to get to this point in the video. They're going to spend the whole time typing like a madman, yelling at me in the chat, and they're not going to get to this point where I say, let's be civil. But if you've got a comment and you get to this point, let's just be civil. Let's have a dialogue. That's all we really want. See y'all next time.